Hey everybody, it is John. This is a sort of home edition of the Damage Report because I have been thinking about this topic for some time, and I don't know exactly how long it'll take to go through a list of 10 things that future generations will condemn us for, and so I didn't necessarily want to take up like half of an episode of the Damage Report at work, so I decided, in fact, that I would do it here instead to save a little bit of time. And also, this is just sort of a historical side note. Why am I formatting this sort of subject in this way? This is really weird and dorky, but one of my favorite YouTube channels is the Dice Tower, and they do sorts of top 10 lists having to do with gaming type things, and I think it's a good way to structure things and to tie together things that don't necessarily always work out in a normal video context. And so that's what I'm doing. By the way, I'm going to be going through 10. They're sort of roughly ordered in terms of importance, like how bad it is that we are doing this thing the way we are right now. And so these will get more important as we go through the list. And that, of course, gives you time. If you want to make suggestions, I will try to respond in real time to your comments as they're coming in. So 10 things future generations will either hate us for or condemn us for, or not necessarily understand why it is that we operated the way that we did. Number 10 is going to probably seem the weirdest that it's on the list. I know that this is just a pet peeve of mine. It is bizarre to me that people don't take this more seriously than they do, but driving while texting, I don't think that people are going to understand it. And the reason that it's on the list is that I think this is one of the easiest things for us to sort of to understand based on the way we look back on past generations. So not that long ago, several decades ago, maybe 40 years ago, drinking while driving was not considered a serious thing. It wasn't considered nearly as bad as we know it is now. Like, if your friends decide that they're drunk, they're going to get in their car, you condemn them for it, rightfully so, but it was not considered that big of a deal back then. And in fact, in the beginning, when people tried to make the laws, more serious for people who do this, that was considered a bad thing. Like, why are you getting involved in this thing that has nothing to do with you? Forget the fact that people are dying. They're either killing themselves or they're killing other people. What business is it of yours to get involved? And now we understand better. But we all text while driving, or go on Instagram, or go on Reddit, or God only knows what else, even though we know that it is as debilitating, I should say, as drinking is. And yet we think that it's totally acceptable, even though it is leading to far more people getting in accidents, getting injured, and even dying. And so I think that in future generations, they're going to look back on this. They probably won't have to drive their own cars. They'll probably be able to just chill and go on Reddit 3.0 or whatever. My last name's Iadarola, by the way. But they will wonder, why was this a controversial thing? When I tweet now that people should go to jail for texting while driving, people attack me, they condemn me, even though that behavior is leading for people to lose their property or to die even. I don't ride motorcycles anymore because of cell phones and because so many people now text while driving. It's just not safe. I almost got driven off a road by a guy in an SUV. I had to literally kick his SUV from my motorcycle because people don't pay attention anymore. It's just become so normalized. I find it very bizarre. So number 10, driving while texting. Number 9, this is sort of, in the past years, become one of my major focuses in terms of environmental issues, and that is plastic pollution. We use plastic for everything. Like, I'm not looking at the camera right now, I'm looking at my desk. And even I have got plastic all over the place. And I recycle, and ever since my girlfriend moved in with me, she takes recycling very seriously. We recycle more. But even so, the amount of plastic that we pump out as a species every single day is obviously not sustainable. It is insane. I did a story just yesterday about more dead whales being found just filled up with plastic. That is horrible. And look, that's just one tiny example, but we understand that the oceans are getting filled up with this stuff. Dumps are getting filled up. It's not sustainable. And yet, even when I go to a place like Trader Joe's that I like, you can buy a sliced avocado in plastic. You eat the avocado, you're not hungry anymore for 15 minutes or so, but the plastic's permanent, or effectively permanent. And we don't question it, really. Like, yes, okay, so we're talking about straws. That's great. Let's have the conversation about straws. Straws are one thing, and maybe that will expand people's consciousness on this issue. But everything comes wrapped in plastic. Everything is packaged in plastic, and that's not only bad in terms of the chemicals that leach into our food and into our skin and all of that. It's just bad because it's there and it will always be there. We've got to come up with some replacement. I know replacements exist. We have to start actually using them. So number 9, using plastic for basically everything and then not caring what happens afterward. By the way, heads up, a lot of these are going to be environmental things. I mean, have you seen my show? Number 8, I will say just virtually everything about our transportation system. Basically pick a thing. The way that we transport ourselves is absolutely horrendous. I mean, the fact that basically every way that we transport ourselves is bad for the environment in terms of producing carbon and things like that. I think that we all understand that is a significant problem. And yes, there has been great evolution over the past decade or two. More buses are, clean, or at least relatively clean in the way that they operate. It's becoming a little bit easier in mass transit to do that. And you are seeing some success in electric cars. I think Norway now, the majority of cars being sold in Norway are actually electric, which, by the way, also requires that the production of the electricity is clean as well, because if it's dirty energy, it's not going to be that much better than simply burning the oil in your car. But that, and like refusing to get in cars together, like it's something as simple as carpooling. No, that's not for us. We can all afford our own cars. Like if you live just a couple of miles away from your job, the idea of like going on a bicycle or something like that, no, that's crazy. Can't do that. As much as I don't like Bird, at least things like Bird are dealing with a little bit of that problem. So basically, yeah, the transportation system, and of course air travel. I hesitate to bring this up because I don't want any right-wingers who are watching this to think that I want to ban all planes instantly or anything. But, pound for pound, it's one of the worst carbon-emitting things that we ever get up to. And I understand there will always need to be planes in some cases. But the fact that we use them for virtually everything when there should be other options, and in some cases there are other options, that is bad too. So number 8, virtually everything about our transportation system. By the way, I am seeing a lot of what you're saying about animals. Just hold a little bit. Let's see. Number 7. Our treatment of animals and factory farming, and also elimination of species. I'm really lumping a lot of things here. But I would say, in general, all of the specific things that we do vis-a-vis animals that is so horrible is driven by our bizarre view of animals, our philosophy on animals, our lack of interest in what degree of sentience they might have or their inherent value, even if they're not sentient. But we learn more and more about how emotionally complex and intelligent animal species are, and we don't care. We either destroy their habitats if they're not useful for us. If they are useful, we exploit their labor, we exploit their meat, all of that. I will say that as of right now, I am not strictly speaking a vegetarian, although I do eat a lot of fake meat. Again, that's one of the positive impacts of my girlfriend moving in with me. I don't consume much meat, and I have had long periods of being a vegetarian. But the amount that we consume is, again, not sustainable, and also contributes so much in terms of carbon in contributing to climate change as well. Yes, a lot of board games behind me. Maybe we'll talk about that at some point. Maybe we'll do a top 10 list. But yeah, so animals and factory farming, obviously, in terms of the sheer cruelty levied on the animals, but also the carbon impact of industrialized agriculture is horrendous and needs to be talked about more. But then also elimination of species. So they were going to be in look, we lose species all the time, but we know some of the big ones that climate change will eventually wipe out. And think about, in a generation or two, you're going to have books just making reference to animals that we take for granted every day right now. They will be impossible. They won't be visible to people in 2 generations. They will have been wiped out, and they will have to read about these animals in books. And I do think many of them will look back and say, why didn't you care about preserving these species? Like, it's not just, hey, maybe let's not tear down that forest because it's going to kill 10,000 unique species or anything. We won't take any sort of restriction on industry or agriculture to benefit an animal. And I think that we should value them more fundamentally. Obviously, some of the specific ways we use them are even worse, but just our general outlook towards them. It's incredibly exploitative, dismissive. Anyway, that's frustrating as well. And so I've seen a lot of you have been... I was trying to see that last comment. Wait, hold on. Yes, to some extent, but I am trying ever to be better at all times, and I am reading the chat. Please don't shave your whole face anymore. Number 6, John shaving. No, that is a bad one, but I do like to do it once a year or so just to see. At some point, I'm going to need to do it to look younger, but for right now, it drops me too low. Okay, number 6, for-profit healthcare, education, prisons, infrastructure, things like that. Basically, that we allow gigantic industries to be operated for profit, even though that means that necessarily many people who desperately need access to those things will not be able to actually use them, or in the cases of things like prisons, that they will be overused because of the profit inherent in their use. Basically, there are certain industries that we know cannot be operated for profit. Like nobody, I don't think anybody anyway, nobody thinks that the like, you know, I guess firemen is the obvious example. Nobody thinks that the firemen should be, you know, private or anything like that. But there are so many other industries that obviously negative consequences are coming from the fact that they are being operated from profit, that people are being barred from using these services if they can't afford it. And I just think it's one of those things where we need to wake up, and once we do, no one will look back and say, why did they switch over to making these publicly funded and run? It's just obvious. Primary education and things like that. Like, who, I understand in this case some right-wingers do actually think that, but who actually thinks that those should be operated for profit? But there's so many others that we need to expand our consciousness and rethink, again, this sort of status quo thinking that, yeah, healthcare should obviously be for profit, and if you can't afford it, maybe you die, and that's acceptable. Basically, putting money before people. Actually, a lot of these, in the end, are about putting money before people. And that's a fundamental problem that runs through many. I would say probably related to this, I would say is number 5, wasting so much money on weapons. This is something that we have known is insane every year going back, obviously, a long time, and yet we continue it. And the budget is always going up in the U.S. military, and it's a problem worldwide as well, but it's a gigantic problem here in the U.S. And we know the speech about, you know, in the end, every bomb dropped, every warship created is, you know, taking food out of people's minds, taking, you know, what could be healthcare out of people, all that. We get that. And yet we continually spend more and more and more. We have conversations about how will you pay for it for virtually every topic except funding the military and providing tax cuts for wealthy individuals and corporations. Everything else is this big budget debate. Hello everybody who's joining now. Is this big debate about the budget, but when it comes to producing weapons or giving money back to rich people, those are exempt from those conversations. And think about how many weapons end up just rusting somewhere. There are tank graveyards and plane graveyards, and some people perhaps seriously thought that we needed those weapons, those vehicles. Some people just wanted to benefit financially in the short term. Obviously, people are getting incredibly rich, both the corporations and the lobbyists who are working for them. My thoughts about Mike Gravel, I don't really have any thoughts about Mike Gravel, honestly. But thank you, Paul, for your comment about my board game collection. I have a few others as well. Gloomhaven is actually down on the ground. It's too big to actually fit in there. So yeah, wasting so much money on weapons is absolutely abhorrent, especially because it's not like everybody is just satisfied to produce the weapons and then store the weapons somewhere here domestically. We then sell those weapons to other countries which perhaps like us are, you know, extremely cavalier in our use of them. But then also, since we have them, they're considered more of an option, and so you get politicians who are so hot and bothered about getting involved in these military conflicts because why not? We've already got the weapons there, and especially if we engage in these conflicts, we can produce more of them, and it can justify expansions in the military budget even more. So number 5 perhaps should be rated even higher, wasting so much money on weapons. Eric, before I get to number 4, Eric T says, show us your Necrons. I wish that I could show you my Necrons, but when I got out of Warhammer 40k, I actually gave them to my friend who expanded the army. He now plays War Machine, but he still has my Necrons. I actually don't have them anymore. I think I have one. Hold on one second. I thought I had one still. I don't know. I'll show you a half-painted piggyback. You can see that. This is a piggyback I was painting. It's for a different game, but better spent money on that than on weapons. Anyway, yes, I don't have the Necrons. I'm sorry. Orcs are the best. I only had Necrons, then I played against Eldar, and I literally never won. Okay, so that was number 5, wasting so much money on weapons. Number 4, sorry, I mean, letting Donald Trump enter the White House. And I mean that in 2 ways, really. I mean that substantively because of the amount of damage that he is doing to the country. Long-term damage, too. I'm not just talking about the stuff that's affecting us right now. I'm talking about the extremely long-term damage. But then also what he represents and the time that he represents and what he emboldened in his office. I mean, for anybody who... It is 100% true that he is not the cause of all of our problems, that he is also a symptom of our problems, but he is the cause of other problems as well. You need a certain sort of people out there to have Donald Trump be elected, that's true, but once he's elected, I mean, the explosion of hate groups and extremist groups and all of that, I mean, that's not just some symptom, that is, he is emboldening those people. So in terms of the substance, I like to think that if there are still... oh God, shut up about Trump. I'm not gonna stop speaking truth to power about literally the most powerful person in the world. Did he mention Yemen? I know I talked about the military and I talk about Yemen on my channel more than literally anybody else on the internet. Nobody watches those videos, by the way, but I've done tons of them. I've had Ro Khanna on to talk about Yemen like 4 times, by the way. But anyway, so in terms of Donald Trump, I mean, the giving away of literally trillions of dollars and bankrupting the U.S. government exactly at the time when we're talking about needing to spend money on things like universal health care, climate change, and things like that, absolutely gigantic. Cutting the corporate tax rate, when moving in the exact wrong direction in terms of corporate taxes. Thank you, Rand. I appreciate that. Like, think about how difficult the battle is going to be to get the corporate tax rate up to where it was just a couple of years ago, let alone actually getting it up to where it needs to be and where it was a couple of decades ago. That is a gigantic problem. It's one of those foundational problems that causes so many other problems. But related to that, I would say someday kids are going to read in the history books about the Muslim ban and the new renewed war against trans individuals in the U.S., about family separation and the expansion of xenophobia into a totally normalized political ideology. I think that Fox News and other right-wing media figures are going to be very much tied up in that as well. Those are gigantic, but also just what he represents. I hope the low point of American political culture and American political discourse. And this is less disdain us for and more won't understand us for. Someday you are going to tell your kids about this time. You're going to tell your grandkids about this time, and they will not understand. Like, they will think that you are exaggerating, that you're lying. And so just get ready for that. It's not going to be a conversation that's going to be productive because it is that insane. Number 3, destruction of the oceans. A lot of these have been about the environment, but I really do think, I talked about it a lot. Look, the plastic is tied in with this, obviously, because that's one of the ways that we're really doing something terrible to the oceans. But the oceans are also one of the principal sort of soaks for the added heat that we're experiencing right now. And that is having a devastating effect as well. We talk about, the reefs and things like that. But the species that are being wiped out due to the increased heating, let alone, oil spills, chemicals, fundamentally the chemical composition of the ocean changing, all of that absolutely devastating. And the reason I want to focus on this is because we so rarely talk about it. Briefly, that gigantic garbage patch in the Pacific, that'll get a little bit of attention, but the oceans make up such a gigantic portion of the Earth's surface, and we act like it doesn't matter and it's not worthy of consideration. But our existence is reliant on the oceans. When the fish stocks are totally wiped out, it is going to be rough times for the gigantic portion of the world population that relies every day on fish and other things that come from the oceans. And so I worry that we're starting to respect the atmosphere a little bit, we're starting to respect the land a little bit, but we are letting the oceans just fall completely by the wayside. And I don't think that's something that we as a species can afford to do. I think that we need to talk more about the oceans. I try to do that on the damage report, and I will continue to do that. Somebody mentioned cleaning up beaches as well. So number 2, this is again one of those foundational things. And I guess it's kind of tied in with putting money before people, allowing politicians to be bought. Future generations fundamentally will not understand that at all. And so the idea that you can transfer gigantic sums of money to a politician, and then that politician passes laws that are beneficial to either you as an individual or the corporation that you represent, that doesn't make sense to any regular person now, let alone in future generations when hopefully we will have moved past that, since we now have some people that are responsible when it comes to campaign finance reform in elected office, and you have organizations like TYT that have been fighting that battle for some time. But that really is the prime, that's the original sin that leads to so many others. Because when you have politicians that get in there that are bought by the fossil fuel companies, can we really be surprised that we don't take renewable, sources of energy seriously? That, how are you going to move away from for-profit healthcare, education, and prisons and all of that if the politicians that theoretically would have to vote to change that system are being paid by those very industries? And again, that's why Cenk makes getting money out of politics his number one issue, because it makes it so impossible to have the necessary reforms in other issues when politicians are being so brazenly bought. And I do think that we're going to win that battle eventually. It's going to be very difficult, and then I think that once we do, it is going to be impossible to explain to future generations how we ever thought it was acceptable that politicians were being bribed so blatantly. So number one, do we have any guesses about what the number one thing that future generations will condemn us for could possibly be? It's the only issue that truly matters. Yeah, that's why I put it number two. That might be number one in terms of import, but I have to follow my heart. And so for number one, for me, what they're not going to understand, what they're going to hate us for, is going to be not caring at all about climate change, ignoring it. And when I say ignoring it, I don't just mean not believing that it's happening. That is climate denial class 1. But there are so many other classes that are just as damaging. They're just not as obviously damaging. So if a politician says that the climate is not changing, that is laughable. And it's been laughable for a very long time. That is climate denial. But if you say that the climate is changing, but you don't think that we are responsible for it, that seems more nuanced and more understandable, but it is not, because the end result of that still would be inaction. If you say that you believe that it is happening and that you believe that we caused it, but you think it would be too difficult to actually do anything about it, or it's not our responsibility because the worst effects of climate change will come about after we're dead, that is, I think, reprehensible, but that is climate denial just the same. Climate denial is not thinking that we need to do what is necessary, regardless of the costs or the difficulty, the trouble, to actually stop the worst excesses of climate change. And I say the worst excesses because we have unfortunately waited too long to ever sort of get back to where we were, or to pretend that we're going to be able to stop some damage from being done. That 12-year figure that is being thrown around, I'm glad that that's out there, but that is not to not have a problem. That is to not have, sort of a near apocalyptic sort of version of climate change that comes about. And so we've ignored it. We've ignored it even though for effectively the entirety of the time that I've been alive, we've known that it is a problem and that we are causing it and that we have an obligation to do something about it. We have not done so. We have continually pushed it down in terms of it being a priority. We have allowed right-wing politicians and some left-wing, or not left-wing, but some Democratic politicians, I should say, and people in the media to spread obvious lies about both climate change and also plans like the Green New Deal to actually do something about it. We just accept that they're going to lie about estimates of the cost and all that. Today we hear that wind power gives you cancer. Or that if your economy was powered by renewable energy, you wouldn't be able to watch TV because the wind only blows sometimes. So we are like 11 years out from that worst case timeline, and every day on my show I have to address insane conspiracy theories about solar energy, which is not what I thought I would have to be doing with my life, but unfortunately, you go to war with the army you've got, I guess. And so ignoring climate change in all of the different definitions of the word ignoring. Keep to oranges. Yes, I want to talk about the oranges of all of these issues, actually. So that's the big one. All of these are devastating in their own way. All of them are going to lead to not only our quality of life being lower, but our future generations, the same for them. But I think that climate change is going to be the biggest one in so many different ways. In the massive disruption of agriculture and our ability to feed ourselves as a species, the both, wars between countries and wars internal to countries, massive migrations of people, cities becoming literally uninhabitable, more people dying just from extreme weather events, but then also mundane changes in climate, actual heat deaths and things like that. I could go through the list, but I hope that you watch the damage report, and this is kind of what we talk about constantly. That is the devastating one, and it is also the one that I worry sometimes about the hope that I've gotten over the past few months. So honestly, since I had AOC on my show back relatively early last year, back before her primary, more and more of my inspiration and hope for the future is being driven by her ability to sort of set the agenda and push the conversation politically in the direction it needs to be. And I love that it is already having such a strong impact on both the House of Representatives and the Senate in terms of support for the Green New Deal. The fact that so many of the people running for the presidency at the very least want you to believe that they take it seriously. I can't say that in all of their cases they actually do. I think that a lot of them support the Green New Deal, and in practice it wouldn't mean much. But that she is putting that pressure on them, and they are already feeling it. They felt it immediately. Also, the Sunrise Movement. And that is the sort of inspiration that is allowing me to continue going, because this job is absolutely devastating emotionally and intellectually on a daily basis. But geez, if she gets sidelined or, whatever, that is going to be absolutely devastating, because we continually watch year after year as the can gets kicked down the road, and we can't afford to. We can't afford to have kicked it as far as we have. I mean, look at the last 2 years. Like, Barack Obama was not the president that we needed to be in terms of climate change, but at least he understood that it was a problem. He wouldn't do, what I would push for. He didn't end fracking or, like mass shut down coal plants and put the massive infusion of money necessary to replace them, not in 20 or 50 years, but in 5 or 10 years. He didn't do that. But he did make a number of different regulation changes that were at least moving in the right direction, and those have been destroyed. Those papers were ripped up almost immediately when Trump got into office. So, like, the time that we didn't have, he is accelerating through it even faster than we were before. And it is devastating. When you do as much reading in this area as I do, when you talk to so many, both academics, climate scientists, and environmental activists as I do, thanks to the damage report, it is devastating. I don't intend for these lists to always be depressing, I should say. And so I will do future ones. And so if you've enjoyed this, I like that you've made suggestions, many of which actually ended up lower down in the list. But if you have suggestions for top 10 lists that you would like me to do, you can, of course, tweet that to me, and all of that. You can comment on Facebook or on Instagram. Instagram.com/John Iadarola. I never promote that, but technically I have an Instagram. You can go there if you want to see pictures of my board games or, my dogs or something like that. Anyway, thank you to everybody who's watching. If you're not already a subscriber to the channel, you should become one, because we put almost all of our content here, and you can see me as well as my co-hosts throughout the week, Brooke and JR and Brett, as well as the huge number of guests that we have. We've got just awesome contributors and correspondents on a number of different issues. We've already had Marianne Williamson and Andrew Yang on. We're trying to have other presidential contenders in this primary on. We've got messages out to all of them. So anyway, I'll see you in the future. Bye, guys.